Hello and welcome to Rajya Sabha Television. You're watching The Big Picture with me, Frank Pereira. In a major boost for police reforms, the Union Cabinet on Wednesday approved a 25,000 crore rupees outlay for upgrading the internal security apparatus in states. According to Union Home Minister Rajnath Singh, the Cabinet Committee on Security chaired by Prime Minister Narendra Modi approved an umbrella scheme on modernization of police forces, with the money to be spent in 3 years from 2017-18. Of a total outlay of 25,060 crore rupees, the centre will provide 18,636 crore rupees, around 80%, while the state's share will be 6,424 crore rupees. On this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze what needs to be done to reform the police force. Joining me on the program today are Balmiki Prasad Singh, former Union Home Secretary and former Governor as well, Prakash Singh, former DG of the BSF and DGP of UP and Assam, Chakshu, Head of Outreach PRS Legislative Research, and Prakash, Legal Editor of The Tribune. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Mr. Balmiki Singh, I'd like to begin with you. What do you think of the Cabinet's decision to, sanction or approve 25,000 crore rupees towards police reforms?
I'm quite happy with this decision, but I have 3 comments to make. First, there is a focus on 3 major challenges facing internal security in this allocation of 25,000 crores. First is, as we all know, terrorism in Jammu and Kashmir, and the second is insurgency in the northeast, and the third is the Naxalite menace, what they have rightly called left-wing extremism, and they have identified 35 districts. Now on this they are spending little over 10,000 crores. And I was also happy that they have taken into consideration hiring of helicopters, upgradation of police wireless, a national satellite network, a crime and criminal tracking network and systems project, etc., etc. My comment in this case is that if we have the necessary political and administrative will, it is possible to get rid of the Naxalite or left-wing menace shortly. Because one is the joint operations. That is, if you are in one district, you cross over to another district, there is no problem today. But when you cross over on the boundaries of the state, there is a problem.
Sure.
And the Naxalites know that. What we should do is, it is the same paramilitary forces, on the other side also, operating to control. They should be allowed to go everywhere. But if there is a case, the case should be registered in the police station belonging to the state where it had occurred, firing or something.
So free movement should be allowed is what you're
Free
suggesting?
movement, that's a requirement, basic requirement, which is not being done.
Better synchronization also, would you say?
Yeah, yes, that's another name for that. Second, which is very important, and that is, and I had tried that as the Union Home Secretary. I had tried in some districts of Bihar, in Jharkhand now. The young district magistrates and the young superintendents of police, they should be given the freedom to operate the police stations and spend money. For example, the criminal justice system in these areas, in these 35 districts, is very poor.
Right.
So you have to give them the freedom to spend. Then you have to give the freedom. I had said that at any given point of time, for development there should be 25 crores, and for police operations there should be 15 crores. And the SPs can decide that. And the moment that money is spent or reduced by, say, 5 crores, the government gives another 5 crores. At any point of time, the superintendent of police has 15 crores and the DMs have got, or deputy commissioners have. So this is necessary to accelerate the pace of both security operations and development operations.
Sure.
My third, which is very important, and that is not mentioned here, that the judicial system, the cases are pending in courts. Prisons are in very, very bad shape. So you have to improve the police stations, you have to improve the jails, and you have to ensure that the judicial system is effective in delivering justice. So these are related issues. There is something missing. Maybe that I don't have the full report, you may not have the full report.
Sure, fair enough. Let me bring in Mr. Prakash Singh into the picture now, into the debate. Mr. Prakash Singh, it's very clear that there is a desperate need for modernization as far as the police force is concerned. So would you say that the cabinet's decision has come at the right time?
Well, I'm very happy with the cabinet decision, and it's a positive move and a forward move. The background of this needs to be understood and brought to light. You see, in 2015, Government of India delinked 8 centrally sponsored schemes. You see, they said at that time, by that time the 14th Finance Commission report had come, and the Finance Commission had increased the share of states from 32% to 42%. So central government said that now that the state share has been gone up from 32 to 42, we can afford to pass on the burden of some of the schemes to the states, and they what they call delinked certain schemes which are being financed by the center, and they said that these schemes should henceforth be taken care of by the states, and one of them was modernization of police forces. So in 2015 they took this decision, and for the last about more than 2 years this has been going on. But the practical experience at the ground level has been that, it was expected that the states with enhanced allocation of revenues to them, they would invest in police, they would spend more on, spend on modernization of police. But the state leadership in most of the states being what it is, they are just not convinced about the need for any kind of investment in the police. And so modernization programs at the state level were in the reverse gear, you can say. They were not getting, and several state directors general complained that at this rate, with the modernization grants drying up, their campaign against terror, against Naxals, against Northeast insurgents, that was bound to get a setback. So this view was conveyed by the state governments also to the Home Ministry, and Home Ministry ultimately realized that the modernization grants must come from the center, because the states, even if they have the money, they will not allocate that for modernization of police.
True.
So, having realized this, the Government of India have revived the scheme for modernization of grants by the Home Ministry, which was earlier in vogue and which had been discontinued in between. And these 25,000 crores would be available for the next 3 financial years, from 2017-18, 18-19 and 19-20. Now the scheme is, as I said, positive. It's a good development. I'm happy about it. But what I would like to emphasize is that, money alone cannot bring about improvements in the police. You can give them better gadgetry, better equipment, better transport, better communications, more forensic laboratories. These would definitely help. And these would enhance the capabilities of the police to deal with the kind of internal security challenges they are faced with. It would enhance their capability vis-a-vis the Maoists, vis-a-vis the Northeast insurgents, vis-a-vis the Kashmir separatists, and generally in responding to law and order challenges, whether it's a communal riot or any other situation, it would enhance their capability.
Sure.
But what we need today is not only allocation of money, but certain institutional reforms, certain structural changes which were prescribed by the Supreme Court. The roadmap was laid down by the Supreme Court in 2006. About a State Security Commission, about Police Establishment Board, about Complaints Authority, about security of tenure for officers, about separation of investigation from law order. So those institutional changes have to take place, and unfortunately the kind of emphasis with those institutional changes should have been getting, they are not getting even now.
Okay.
So I'm happy about whatever has happened. I'm happy that modernization grants will be released by the center, but what we desperately need is I mean, the structure, certain structural changes in the police.
Fair enough. You're saying
which
that
would bring about the kind of transformation we are looking forward to.
Fair enough. You're saying that a lot more needs to be done than just pumping in money to reform the police force. Chakshu Roy, I'd like to bring you into the picture now. PRS, has done an elaborate study on police reforms. A paper was published, I think, in June of this year, if I'm not mistaken. What were the findings of your research?
Frank, I think, I'd like to start by saying that both Balmiki sir and, Prakash ji have laid down the foundation for the debate that we are having. I'm just going to break down as to where I would like to focus some of the points on. I'd like to talk about the factors to what is the manpower situation in our police forces. That's one. The second is the infrastructure. And the third is what is the capacity of state governments to absorb the kind of modernization funds which the center might release. There are a number of opportunities across all these 3 points. When it comes to manpower, when we were looking at the numbers kind of tell us that at the state government level, there's almost a shortage of about, approximately 21-22% of personnel. The sanctioned strength of personnel versus the number of personnel available is short by 22%. For the central forces, which deal with some of this internal security issues, that shortage is about 7%. So that has a huge impact not only on policing, also on internal security, and also on the morale of the forces, because the lesser number of people, which means
extended work hours and all the other problems that come along with it.
And one of the most oft repeated thing is that there's not enough leave, there's not enough downtime, which affects operational outcomes.
Which is very required when you're doing a job like this.
Absolutely. So that's one issue definitely to think about. The other issue to think about, especially when we're talking about money and spending money on operational things, it is on what is the kind of money that is being spent on. There are a number of reports, by the Controller and Auditor General of India and other agencies, which point out that mobility is an issue with our police forces. So, do we have the required number of vehicles for our forces to move around in their policing function? So that's one. The second is a number of times, you would notice this in movies, right? Where the police have weapons which are not as good as the weapons of the bad guys. And that seems to be the situation on the ground. The weaponry that our police forces currently have are not at mark with what is being used by the people who are creating the trouble. So some amount of investment, and I was reading some numbers, and it said that Rajasthan and West Bengal had approximately a 75% shortages in the weaponry that they require. The third aspect of the thing is, if the center is allocating 25,000 crores, do the states have the capacity to absorb this? And this is something that Prakash ji alluded to, which is, are the states spending enough, and do the states have the capacity to spend that money,
to absorb those funds,
to absorb these funds? And numbers from the 2015-16 financial year indicate that of all the allocated funds towards police modernization, the states were only able to uptake about 14 to 15% of those funds.
Sure.
So I think those are 3 key areas. But obviously, will money solve all these problems? No. Prakash ji pointed out there are structural things to be pointed out.
Right.
Balmiki sir pointed out that there are issues on the ground which relate to the running of the police station, what happens when jurisdictions get overlapped and how do you manage those things. Those are extremely important things that the money alone will not be able to solve.
Sure, there are multiple issues involved, and they need to be dealt with, on the whole as such. But, Satya Prakash, I'd like to bring you into the picture now. Mr. Prakash Singh brought up the Supreme Court, and he said in 2006 there were directives issued by the Supreme Court towards police reforms, but none of the states seem to have conformed to these directives. Why is that so?
Well, Prakash Singh will tell you there are states which have not implemented it, and the Supreme Court is still monitoring it. Not just that, there is another PIL pending before the Supreme Court, in which the Supreme Court is directing various states to fill up the vacancies in police force. There are states which have not 20 or 22%, even 30%, 40% vacancies in police force. So there are huge problems. But the best part which with this allocation starts is it reflects the political will of the government of the day, that they want to do something. Otherwise, police reforms have never been on the agenda of any government, because every time there is a push from judiciary or civil society, the governments would resist it. You can ask Mr. Prakash Singh how the state governments, even after the Supreme Court verdict, there are 7, 8 or 9, 10 review petitions filed. Even central government filed a review petition seeking review of some of the directions, that it cannot be implemented or it should not be directly like this. Even after the dismissal of review petitions, many of the state governments which enacted fresh police act in terms of the Supreme Court directives, they were in fact the intention was to circumvent the Supreme Court order rather than to implement it. So the real issue is the political will, and then at the ground level, whether you are in a position to insulate the police force from political interference while they are functioning on the ground.
Sure.
If that happens, it cannot happen without the structural changes ordered by the Supreme Court in its September 22, 2006 verdict. Unless that happens, it's very difficult, because money alone, as we have almost all the panelists they have said, money alone will not solve the problem. What is needed is structural reforms in the police force, in entire police force across the country. Otherwise, this money can be spent, but it will not
won't get us the desired results. Fair enough. Because of paucity of time, I'm going to ask my guests to be brief now in the second round of comments. Mr. Balmiki Singh, as far political will is one aspect of it, but what about political interference? As long as the politicians interfere with the police forces, how can you talk of reforms?
You see, when you get into the arena of police reforms, I think those who have the authority to reform are the most reluctant actors, and they do believe, and things have gone for the worse, that police is an instrument of political power. And so long that is there, you have to move slowly, and the Supreme Court judgment was a good. But the basic issue that the political leadership has to constantly keep into view, and that needs to be done by the media and the judiciary both, that the primary responsibility of the state is to safeguard life, liberty and property of its citizens. That primary responsibility is not being discharged. The other day, 36 persons were killed because the district administration could not enforce section 144 in Haryana. Now, that is where the question arises that would money be the answer? No.
True.
What is the voice of the police? What is the voice of the superintendent of police, of the district magistrates who have to enforce? And judicial courts are very important.
Right.
The prison administration is very important. You saw there is no suitable prison, so make another prison.
Right.
That kind of issue are basic to the system, and therefore it is necessary that the money is spent to strengthen the police, but at the same time, as is the consensus emerging here, that political interference, as you rightly asked, should be minimal.
Fair enough. Mr. Prakash Singh, modernization is one aspect of it, and that's what we've been talking about over the last 15 minutes or so. But let's talk about another aspect. What about sensitization of the police force itself?
No, that's absolutely important. The police has to be sensitized. But as I have been saying, there are two aspects to sensitization. One, of course, you have to deal with the human material. What kind of background they come from, and what kind of ethos they represent, what kind of values they have brought with them. Our training academies will have to sensitize them and bring about the necessary changes in their thinking, in their approach, in their attitude towards women, towards minorities, towards tribals. That will be absolutely necessary. Sensitization, how they have to deal with the common man, how they have to deal with the poor people, how they have to deal with underprivileged. That has to be taught, that has to be drilled into the. But the larger question is that sensitivity is related to the degree of autonomy that you give to the policeman. I mean, if you have decided that no, this group is to be hammered, then what do you expect? The police will go and hammer them. So sensitivity depends on how much of functional autonomy that you have. If I without being specific, there was an incident when people from Uttarakhand were coming to Delhi to agitate. The instructions from the Chief Minister was, I'm sorry to be using the exact words, Maro Salo ko. So, I mean, that is what happened. They were beaten black and blue in Muzaffarnagar. So, sensitivity will happen only when the political stranglehold goes. Sensitivity, I mean, a man may be very sensitive, but if you are asked to and you are forced to do something insensitive, probably you will do it because police is a disciplined force and they carry out the command from above. So, sensitivity is absolutely important, and while the in-house effort should be there, we have to ensure that the kind of wrong directions, the kind of such illegal orders, they are also stopped.
Fair enough. We need, reforms at all levels if you want to reform the police force as such. Chakshu Roy, is there any research that points toward a particular model of police reforms that have worked, or is there any pilot that is happening somewhere which has shown some kind of promise?
I think there are a fair number of things that are happening across the country. There are areas of community policing, which the police is trying across the country. Some of them seem to be working well. I want to just use my closing remarks to talk about the fact as to what is the kind of forward thinking should we be doing right now when it comes to either modernization of police reform. A lot of our thinking when it comes to police is for the present situation. The country is going to change. The kind of threat that we'll have for internal security and for law and order will also change dramatically. Is our thinking and is our planning for that, or is our planning for current scenarios? Because if our planning is for current scenarios, then we are headed for a whole lot of trouble in the next 2 or 3 years.
Okay, fair enough. Satya Prakash, as far as laws to deal with the problem as such, do you believe that they need to be revisited? Do we have sufficient laws to deal with the problem? Is there a major overhaul that is required in that department?
In fact, what we are facing is multiplicity of laws, and there are too many laws. I don't think you need many more laws. What is needed is enforcement, and what we have already discussed, minimal political interference. Apart from that, structural reforms, sensitization, and of course training. The real problem today we have is police and population ratio. We have perhaps the worst in the world, or among the world worst. It has to be improved. Otherwise, of course, you can have the policeman work for, instead of 8 hours, he or she can be forced to work for 11-12 hours. But then the quality of policing will decline, and it will result into lots of problems. Apart from because in the past we have faced, not in state police, but in central paramilitary forces, we have faced that there are personnel who are killing their own people out of anger or sometimes frustration. Sometimes there are serious cases of indiscipline because of this kind of scenario. So this number question has to be addressed. Otherwise, we are headed for more trouble.
Okay, I've got, I think, about 4 minutes left on the program, so I'm going to try and get as many comments in as possible over the next 4 minutes. Mr. Balmiki Singh, as far as fixing accountability is concerned, do you believe that can address several of the problems facing the police force if you can fix accountability?
Yes, accountability is very important, because the permanent civil servants and police officers have permanence of tenure. But what is required is that in a democracy, good governance demands that democratic leadership has to empower both institutions and manpower. And when you empower institutions and also strengthen the system by giving trained manpower, then without freedom they can't. They should be accountable, but they should have the freedom to decide. And this is very much necessary, because good governance means quality delivery of services in respect of rule of law also.
Sure. It would be apt, I think, to close the program today with a former top cop's comments. Mr. Prakash Singh, close the show for us with your concluding remarks.
Well, what we have today is the ruler's police. What we need is people's police.
Okay.
And for that, structural changes in the existing structure are absolutely important.
Okay, I think that you very well summed it up for us, there concluding the show on the right note. I'd like to thank all my guests for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. Mr. Balmiki Prasad Singh, Prakash Singh, Chakshu and Satya Prakash, thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining me on the program and putting things into perspective for us. That's all the time we have today. See you again next time.